So it's my pleasure to introduce today Stephanie DiMarco, our speaker. First thing I wanted to mention is that she, like some other speakers that you've had so far, is a Berkeley alum. In fact, she's from the business school, from our business school as an alum of Berkeley. And since then, she's become the founder and CEO of Advent Software. Advent is a leader in the financial services sector software space, i.e. selling software into the financial industry. And today, Advent is an 800-person company, and its headquarters is in downtown San Francisco. And honestly, Stephanie is a great friend of the university and a very good advisor for the university, and we're very happy to have her. And I know that you're going to enjoy this presentation, and I'm certainly looking forward to it. So with that, Stephanie DiMarco, CEO, founder of Advent.
Thanks. I think I'm going to put my... Thank you, Iklak, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Is that working, the microphone? I always get very nostalgic when I come back on campus, so enjoy your 4 years here. It's a very short amount of time, and you'll miss it when you're gone. So I thought I'd start out by asking, how many people here think that you want to start a business or do something entrepreneurial? It's kind of a loaded question for an entrepreneurial class, but I thought it'd be useful given my experience. I've actually started and have been running a software technology company for about 23 years. So I thought I would talk a little bit about the creation aspect and the building aspect, and then sustaining a business in the long term. As I said, I started about 23 years ago and started this company, Advent Software. And today, the business has a market capitalization of over $1 billion, and we have about 850 employees around the world. So it's a good-sized, medium-sized business. So there's a lot embedded in those three words that I talked about: creating, building, and sustaining a business. And so I thought I would use that as the framework for this talk. So starting at the beginning, creating a business, I think with me, and I think it's probably the case in a lot of new businesses, it really did literally start with a blank sheet of paper. And some businesses get started with a paper napkin that someone doodled on in a restaurant. And that was literally how we started, was taking out my partner and I, who was also a Cal grad. He was in the College of Engineering. Taking out a piece of paper and writing down a lot of questions. What is it we want to do? Who do we want to sell to? What do we want to name the company? How are we going to get the money to start it? Who are our competitors going to be? How do we create something that will make our product better than what our competitors have? Who are all of our potential competitors? How do we attract people to come and work for us? Big on our list, and probably written many, many times on that list, was how do we get the money to start? Because we were just a couple of years out of college, and we didn't have any funds ourselves. And in fact, the idea of quitting our full-time jobs was really daunting, because we needed our full-time jobs to pay our rent. So the where does the money come from was a big question. And it's a real adrenaline rush being part of a startup like that. There's so much to do, and your motivation is so high, because as in our case, if we weren't successful as an enterprise, what it meant for us was that we were going to have to redo our resumes and go back and look for a job. And after starting out on this venture, it would have been very disappointing to have to basically go back. So 1983 was maybe a little bit different than things are today, but I think there's still a lot of similarities. I mean, one difference was that there weren't a lot of software startups in 1983. The software industry was certainly around, but it was certainly not as big as it is today. And the category that Advent really holds a leadership position in today really didn't exist. I mean, there were time-sharing companies that, that produced the kind of results that our software produces today, but the category as its own really didn't exist. It was really up to us to create it and to give it definition. And so that was basically the idea that my colleague and I had. We were both working in an investment management firm, and we had very little automation. We actually had somebody in the office whose her job title was typist. And the most sophisticated piece of equipment that we had was an IBM Selectric computer. Now, everyone in here, except for maybe us, is too young to remember what an IBM Selectric computer is, but a Selectric typewriter, I can't even, you know, it was so long ago. I mean, it was basically just a typewriter. It was an electric typewriter. And what this person did was to type up our customer reports each and every month. And so my friend and I, Steve Strand, said, you know, there must be a better way. And so we had the idea to build some software that would basically automate the trading and the accounting for the portfolios of the clients of this investment firm. And so that was basically our idea. And it was really, you know, in hindsight, a very good collaboration. He was the engineering brain, and I have more of the business, marketing, and finance side. And it's not always true that, that it requires that you have both of those day one. Certainly there are a lot of engineers that have built great businesses on their own, but I think in our case, the collaboration of my talents and his talents were really key to our success. And part of it was because he was a pretty classic engineer, and he was a perfectionist. And so it was very important to him to build, you know, the most beautiful thing, and which is a wonderful quality that that he was so focused on the highest quality and building a better mousetrap. Where I was a little more concerned with, what are we going to be able to sell? Who are we going to be able to sell it to? And how are we going to be able to generate some income so we can actually keep going as a company? And a good example from those early days, and I think also a good example of why startups are so fragile, is you have so many decisions to make. And one wrong turn can basically be the end of your business. And we almost had one of those, and it really came around this idea of technical purity, where Steve was not very happy writing software for the IBM PC. It was a very simple, very rudimentary personal computer that was available in 1983. It had a 10 megabyte hard disk. That was how big the hard disk was, and it was a very, very slow machine. And so he was complaining all the time that, you know, maybe this wasn't going to work because people, you know, people weren't going to, this machine wasn't going to be fast enough, and he wasn't going to be able to write the kind of software that he wanted to be able to produce on the IBM. And so for a while, he started lobbying me pretty heavily to write software for digital equipment machines, specifically the PDP 1123. Or a Data General machine. And those names may not be familiar to you because those companies aren't around anymore. Those were mini computers, and mini computers running Unix. And so the technical architecture of those computers really appealed to him, and he felt that, you know, he could do something that would be a much better product by writing software for some of the mini computers that were available at the time. And I was not convinced. First of all, they were really expensive, and there was something about this emerging generation of personal computers that I felt, because of their low cost and how accessible they were to small businesses, that a lot of people were going to buy them, and we could really differentiate ourselves if we created a very sophisticated piece of financial software for these little machines. And fortunately for us and for Advent, I was able to persuade him that that was the right thing to do, because if we had gone down the path of the mini computer, we would be out of business. We just like digital equipment and Data General eventually did go out of business. And we went down the path of doing something that was a little riskier and a little less sure, because the trajectory that we all know today and what's happened in personal computing wasn't clear then. But there's a quote that I like from Mark Twain, where he says, all you need in this life are ignorance and confidence, and then success is sure. And I think that's a really good credo oftentimes for startups, because we certainly had both in spades. We were very ignorant and inexperienced, but we were confident and we were eager and we were hardworking. And so we persevered and we followed our instincts. And in the case of choosing the personal computer as the platform, there wasn't any research paper that we were going to be able to read that said that that was the right thing to do. But my instincts told me it was the right thing to do, and from that point on, I've really learned to trust my instincts. So I said that one of the other big questions that we had was, we figured out what we wanted to do, but then we needed to raise some money to be able to do it, because we were only a couple of years out of college, and I'm sure most of you don't have lots of money to start entrepreneurial ventures. We were in the same situation. And we were very, very naive about what it took to raise capital. But we weren't so naive that we didn't realize that we would look really naive to a venture capitalist or an institutional investor. And so we were really reluctant to go that route, because we didn't feel like A, we would be successful, knocking on the door of a venture capital firm, and B, I had a sense that, and again, these were instincts because I didn't really have any experience, but I had a sense that we wanted to retain as much control over our destiny as we possibly could, and by giving that up by bringing in institutional investors, we just weren't prepared to do that. And part of the reason I wasn't prepared to do that was we were still figuring out what we wanted to do, and so it would have been a very difficult environment to have people coming in and saying, well, you should do this, or what about that? We really needed to iterate on our idea. And so we went knocking on doors of people that we knew that were individual investors, and we're very, very fortunate to find a guy who actually was a friend of my husband's, who was a private investor, and he wrote a check. We actually went out to dinner, told him our idea, and he wrote us a check for $50,000, which, in 1983, that seemed like a lot of money. It still wasn't a lot of money to start a business, even back then. It was a pretty small amount of money to start a business, but we, were happy with what the check that he gave us, and we actually funded the company on that $50,000 investment, which I think is one of the real interesting things about Advent Software. As I said, we have a market cap today of about $1 billion, and our seed capital was not millions and millions of dollars. It was $50,000. It makes you spend money really, really carefully when you have a small amount of money as your capital base. So we didn't really have any way of knowing that we were at the beginning of what was going to become a very, very big trend, the growth of the PC industry. And alongside the PC industry, another thing that was happening was in the early 80s, it was also the beginning of a sustained bull market. So the stock market grew rapidly through the first 10-year period where Advent had started. So we really benefited from those two parallel trends: the growth in personal computing and the sustained bull market that started in the 80s. But we were definitely not an overnight success. We did manage to stay capitalized on the $50,000, but it wasn't as if the company took off like a rocket ship. We sold one customer, then we sold another customer, we tweaked our product. We actually grew very, very slowly because we were learning along the way. And there was no roadmap because there wasn't another company that we could look at who was doing exactly what we were doing. We were basically making it up as we went along. But we had just enough success that we stayed in business. It was terrifying. I used to always worry about when I was going to have to go back and find a job because maybe this company wouldn't work. But in hindsight, there were a bunch of things that we did right that we didn't necessarily realize at the time. And the first was what I talked about, not raising traditional venture capital. I think that was, in hindsight, a very, very good thing to do. The second thing, which I think is an important lesson for would-be entrepreneurs, is we decided to focus on something where there were very few other companies there. And so we were one of just a handful of companies who were developing financial software for investment institutions. Our customers aren't individuals, they're institutions like Goldman Sachs and Alliance Capital and bigger companies. In the early days, we targeted smaller companies, but again, they were companies, not individuals. And so nobody was shining a bright white light on what we were doing. You weren't opening the Chronicle or the Wall Street Journal and reading stories about people starting companies to build portfolio management software. It wasn't that sexy. It wasn't that flashy. Our competitors weren't getting acquired by Microsoft for hundreds of millions of dollars. And so as a result, the category didn't attract a lot of venture capital. It didn't attract a lot of competing companies. So in a lot of ways, the world was our oyster because we were alone in that marketplace. And so we had many, many years where we just didn't have a lot of competition. And it wasn't really until after we'd had a lot of success that the category started to get more attention and more people started to come into the market. I got a real kick out of, an article yesterday in yesterday's Chronicle where they were listing the Web 2.0's top 10 lies. And I really liked number 2. Number 2 was, this is not a bubble. Hot parties, overheated PR pitches, and 5 or 6 dozen social networking sites are just healthy indicators of a new boom. And I think that really summarizes the problem with a lot of startups. The press loves writing about startups, particularly when they get acquired by Google for these stratospheric valuations. But it's a little like doing a news story on gambling in Las Vegas, where all you do is highlight the 1 or 2 people who actually walk away from the tables with some winnings. I mean, the real story is that most people don't, and the odds are stacked against you. And startups are that way. It's very competitive. And so my advice to would-be entrepreneurs is when you're thinking about starting a company, try to focus on an area away from all the noises. Because if the press is writing about it, and if the venture firms are funding 5 or 6 dozen companies, then the opportunity's already gone. There isn't an opportunity anymore. Somebody is already doing it. They've been doing it way ahead of you, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to do it better than all those companies and be able to succeed and survive as a company. Now, there are always exceptions, but I think that that for us that was a very good strategy, and I tend to really like niche companies. And Advent is very much of a niche company. And people used to tell me in the early days of Advent that if I was lucky, maybe this business could grow to $20 million in revenues. And next year we'll do $200 million in revenues. And so it's a niche business that has turned out not to be such a small niche. It's actually because the technology has advanced, what it's allowed us to do is increase the size of the market that we address. And it's really allowed us to grow our available market. So I like to say that, that it took us 7 years to become an overnight success. You know, we really toiled away for a long, long time in those early years, kind of one customer at a time, and slowly improving our product. And at the same time, a number of things were happening in the industry. Moore's Law was in full force, and each generation of PCs was twice as powerful as the next, and local area networking was taking off, and Microsoft was a real ally of ours because they were providing the tools that made small businesses really want to use their machines. And so all of a sudden, 7 years later, we were actually in the right place at the right time, and the company really started to take off. And it was around that time that I kind of moved my mindset from surviving, which had been a lot of how I thought about the early days, to what do we need to do to really grow this business and take advantage, aggressively take advantage of the opportunity. So now I'm going to shift from the creating the business phase to the next phase of a business, the build-up. And so if you do manage to survive the startup phase, you have to think about how you build and sustain an enterprise. And in my experience, companies they tend to reach certain plateaus, and where all of a sudden everything that you're doing kind of stops working. Things don't work as well as they did before. And a convenient way to think about some of those plateaus or those actually some of them are inflection points, is around the number of people. And I think the first inflection point that we reached was around 50 people. And below 50 people, it's very much of a startup environment, and everybody knows each other, and it's really easy to communicate. There's not a lot of hierarchy. Hopefully, there's not a lot of politics. Communication is really simple. You just walk down the corridor and talk to someone, and it's pretty easy to get things done. And people are wearing multiple roles, and startups have to wearing multiple hats. And startups really have to operate that way, and that's the right way for startups to operate. But it's actually the wrong way to. It's very difficult to scale a business when you're operating that way, because communication starts to break down when you get beyond 50 people, and it gets much more difficult to get things done within the company. And then I think the next plateau an inflection point that we hit was probably around 200 people, and then about 500 people. Today we're about 850 people, and we have global operations. And I'd say that in general, our organization, I don't see that we'll have a fundamental change in our organization, probably maybe until we get beyond 1,000 people. But we're always tweaking it. We're always making changes to our organization. And at that first phase, and at subsequent phases, sometimes what happens is it becomes necessary for certain people to leave, because maybe the skill sets that were successful when you were a startup or in the mid-sized company phase, those skill sets aren't. Sometimes those people can't transfer those skill sets to the next phase of the business. I've been fortunate. I've taken the company from here to from 0 to 850 so far, and so far so good. But that's not always the case. And actually, it wasn't the case for my co-founder. He really struggled when the company was about 150 people. I'd say between 50 and 150 people, he really struggled. And the reason he struggled was that he's a brilliant engineer and a fabulous individual contributor. No one can write more beautiful code than this guy. But he had a very hard time hiring people and recruiting people and thinking about running a team and running an organization, because he really isn't very much of an individualist. And so he actually ended up leaving in about 1994, because it was difficult for him to reconcile his founder status with being an individual contributor. That was a really tough thing for him to do. I kept encouraging him that, hey, it's okay to not be running the engineering organization. It's okay for you to be the brilliant scientist, But he wasn't okay with it, and so he actually ended up leaving in 1994, which was a very difficult thing to have the co-founder leave. After that point, though, actually the company really accelerated and did very well. So the company needed him to leave because if he couldn't get comfortable in that role, we really had to have someone leading and building our engineering team. In an interesting twist, though, as an aside, he actually came back to the company 12 years later, last year, and is now an individual contributor in our software engineering organization. So I'm really thrilled that he made the decision to come back. But I think it was, he needed 12 years of separation to realize that he actually really loved what we were doing. And by then, you know, he was perfectly okay with, no longer did he have this, his own personal conflict with, you know, being the founder and not being the head of the department. So I've talked a little bit about organizational changes. That's one of the things that happens that you have to think about and deal with as you grow a company. But probably the most important area is, you know, how do you evolve as the market evolves? We all know this is a very fast moving industry, and it's the rate of change in our industry and computer science and the life sciences. It's the rate of change that actually creates all the opportunity that exists. That's one side of the pancake. The other side of the pancake is that it's the rate of change that creates danger to a company that's an incumbent and is trying to build and sustain an existing business. And so the potential of being eclipsed by new technology and a new competitor, the longer you're around, you know, the greater that becomes of someone coming in with a discontinuous innovation. So Advent actually has a pretty good track record in this regard. We've been in business for 23 years, and as you can imagine, we've seen a lot of technology cycles. You know, our first programs that we were writing were on MS-DOS, and you know, it was a character-based display and on pretty puny computers. And so a lot has changed in the last 23 years. I often laugh that we're like one of those contestants on the TV show Survivor, but we're the survivor of the software industry. And I look around. We went public in 1995, and a lot of the companies that went public around that period, there were a lot of software companies, and the majority of the ones that were about our size that went public at that time have been sold. There are very few standalone companies that are our peers that are still around. And it's because it's hard to do. It's hard to sustain. But I've always been very committed to being an independent company. I guess I just can never work for anybody else. That's kind of my problem. But actually, the real reason is I think that as an independent company, we have a better opportunity in a niche market to serve our customers because we're totally dedicated to the financial services market. So if we were acquired by a larger organization, you know, our strategy and our customers' needs might not necessarily be the most important thing for that company. And at Advent, our customers, who are some of the biggest financial institutions in the world, they know that you know, their needs are the most important thing. So I've always been, you know, focused on staying an independent company. But it's a hard thing to do, especially if you're a public company like we are, because if you're going to, you can't just be a public company and stay the same size. If you stay the same size, you're going to get acquired because public companies have to grow in order to exist. And if you're going to grow, you have to really be assured that you're evolving with the technology as it's evolving around you. And so we've been successful navigating all these technology cycles over the last 23 years, really, I think, for two sort of main reasons. The first is we stay very, very close to our customers, almost obnoxiously so. I mean, we spend a lot of time with our customers, and you know, we'll call them up and say, we're thinking about building a new product, and or we have a new version that we want to add to an existing product. and we want to come over and visit you, and we'd like to have the head trader there, the CEO there, the head of IT. You know, we'll list off the 10 people that we want in the room, and can we spend 5 hours with you? And you know, we'll bring our technical team and our marketing people, and we'll go through prototypes, and we'll spend time interviewing everybody who's going to be on the value chain of using this product. And it's a discipline that we've developed over the years that has really allowed us to have a great track record of success. We haven't had any bombs. I mean, we have very successful products. We never have had a product that we've launched that, you know, just didn't work. And a lot of it I really attribute to this maniacal, fanatical focus on being with our customers and really deeply understanding what they need. And in our case, it's really necessary because our applications are really complex and deep. So it's not like we can just show them a few screens and say, you know, do you like this? Do you like the color? It's not that kind of an application. So if we can understand their requirements on a really deep level, then we can be almost guaranteed that we're going to have a successful product hit on our hands. And then the second thing is we put our money where our mouth is. So we invest a lot, and we've always invested a lot. And so we never got to a point where we said, hey, isn't this great? We're making $30 million a year. You know, let's pay some dividends. We've always invested a high percentage of our revenues in R&D. And I think that's one of the things that's enabled us to maintain this being on the cutting edge is we invest this, as I said, 18 to 20%. This year, it'll be about $35 million that we'll invest in new R&D. So we're investing for the next cycle. And it's really the companies that get left in the dust are those that they make 1 or 2 mistakes, or maybe they make both. No, I guess you'd only make one of these two. You either underinvest and you cash cow your business when you get to sort of a midlife, or they just build the wrong things. And so those are the two things that we've managed to avoid. There is actually a third reason I think that we've been very successful, and it's something to think about in the startup phase. You know, when you're thinking about your company, when you're thinking about starting a company, and that is that we have a really great business model, and so not all technology companies have great business models. And so you want to think about, with all those questions that you're asking in the early days of your business plan, what is your business model? How are you going to make money? And how does that business model, how is it sustained over time? And the reason our business model, I love our business model, it's we sell these really complex applications to really big institutions, and they run their businesses on our applications. So they're very, very dependent on us. They can't open their doors and service their customers or make their trades if our stuff isn't up and running and running like a well-timed Swiss train. And they also pay us recurring revenue. So we have a lot of visibility into what our revenues are going to be quarter after quarter, year after year. And the switching costs are really high. So once they put in all our stuff and put in their data and have all their customer information on it and are using it for years and years, it's actually really expensive for them to take it out and put somebody else's in. So they're strongly motivated to work with us once they're up and running. And so if we do a great job for our customers, they're really not inclined to kick us out. And so we have this virtuous cycle of listening to make sure we're building the right stuff, investing in hiring great engineers from Cal to help us build our products, paired with this recurring revenue stream that pays for it all. And it really has created a very profitable, predictable business that has very high barriers to entry. And that's what you want, because you know, once you have any amount of success, people will try to copy you. And a lot of people have tried to copy us. We subscribe very much to the Andy Grove theory of only the paranoid survive, and we pay a lot of attention to who our competition is and what our competition's doing and who we think our next competitor might be. And it's interesting, a lot of people have failed in this market because they come in and they don't realize just how deep the domain is and just how sticky our customers are. And so over the years, we have a place in the office where we have a graveyard of all of our competitors. And over the years, we have had a lot of people who have entered and exited this business. Actually, most recently, the one we were really pleased to see bite the dust was Intuit made a foray into this market about 18 months ago. And they made a big splash about how they were going to get into the low end of our market, the advisory market. And that we were a little bothered by that. I mean, Intuit is a great company, and Intuit's very good at listening to their customers and building great products. And they launched this product, and then 3 months later, they pulled it, and they said, we're exiting this business because once they had some live customers, they were smart enough to realize they didn't realize how deep it was, and they said, we're not going to be able to make any money at the prices we intend to charge in this business, and they exited the business, which was great for us. We were very happy about. So the last point I really want to just emphasize is if you are successful creating and building a business, the software business, in the case of software, it really is a people business. People are everything, and that's very true at Advent, and it really is our mantra at Advent, because we operate in this deep, nuanced domain, and it takes. We have employees who've been with us for 18 years, 10 years. And they're very, very valuable because they understand deeply all this complicated domain of the investment industry. Our customers collectively manage $14 trillion on our applications. So, it's a very serious, big business, and it's very important that our employees really understand what those customers need. And so we invest a lot in training and in our people so that they become experts in this whole world of global investing and global technology. And that's very important, I think, to understand as an entrepreneur, why be an entrepreneur? Why take this class, and why why start a business? I can share with you why I did it. And it really, for me, it really wasn't about making money, although that has been a nice byproduct. But I really was motivated to start a business because I didn't like what I saw as my available alternatives. After I left Cal, I worked at a couple of different places. I worked at the Bank of America, and I worked at two small investment firms. And in every case, I just didn't like it. It wasn't so much I didn't like the work, I didn't like the places. They were very hierarchical, and they just didn't have the kind of environment that I was looking for. And I also felt that my destiny was under somebody else's control. So if I was going to get a promotion, particularly at the Bank of America, my level was, every employee had a number, and my number was a number 14. And I remember thinking, gosh, these guys that have the big views on the 70th floor, they must have really big numbers. And to go from a 14 to whatever number they are, that seems like it's going to take a long time. And I can control it only to the extent that someone else thinks I'm doing a good job. And that was just so unappealing to me at age 23, that somebody else was going to really determine the rate at which I could be successful or not. So a big part of my motivation for starting a company was I wanted to work in a place that was a meritocracy, where if we did great things, then I was going to get the rewards for it. And so for me, it's really been a wonderful experience, because I've been able to create a working environment and a culture that's very much a meritocracy. It's not very hierarchical. It's probably more hierarchical at 850 than it was at 50, but it's not a real hierarchical place. It's a very open place. And that's a nice thing. And that's really made the whole process of starting a company, building a company, and continuing to run it just a whole lot of fun. It's really fun for me to go to work every day. I really, really enjoy it. So that's kind of the end of what I wanted to communicate. And I think we have a few minutes for some questions. Anyone? Yeah?
You mentioned back in the 80s that Advent created a new category of software. So how did you come up with the idea in the first place? And do you have any tips for us about coming up with fresh ideas?
We came up with the idea because of where we were working. So we were basically had the problem. So we worked in an investment firm. We said, boy, this really stinks the way we're doing it. There's a better way. And I think that the seeds of a lot of great ideas come from things that you know. So if you just have an instinct for something if you know it. So that's a great place to mine for ideas. And in our case, that we just lucked into it. Yes.
If you hadn't worked at those investment firms during the beginning of your career, do you think you would have ever started your own company?
Okay. The question is, if I hadn't worked in an investment firm, would I have started a company? I think I probably would have, just because I was such an impatient person. So, but it might have been something different, completely different. I was really interested in computers, so I think I would have probably tried to do something in computers that I felt I understood and knew. There's certainly in every successful venture, people will tell you there's a fair amount of luck that goes into any successful venture. And I feel very lucky that we landed in a niche that looked really tiny, and through our efforts, we were really able to grow the category. Our efforts and then the combination of what happened in the industry. Yes?
You said that back in '83, you were reluctant to go to big venture capitalists.
Mm-hmm.
What was the specific reason in today's market, like 2006, do you think it's still a great idea to go to non-traditional?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to slam traditional venture capitalists. They can be great funders of companies. We didn't want to go because we didn't think we'd be successful. We were so we kind of started this company with a vague idea. So we didn't have a sophisticated business plan. We didn't have a lot of market research. We didn't know what we were doing. So we would have had a very hard time going to traditional venture capital. I actually did raise traditional venture capital at a time when the company didn't need the money, but I wanted to bring some advisors into our company. So we did go out and raise some money, and just to learn about it at a point where we didn't have to do it, but I thought it would be a good thing for us to learn about and know about, and we brought some people on our board. But the timing just wasn't right. So I think if you have the kind of advisors who can advise you and you certainly have a lot more resources than we had available to us. I mean, we didn't even know what a business plan looked like. And we couldn't go on the web, and we couldn't take a class that taught us about what we needed to do. So that was a large part of why we didn't want to do it. If you can fund a company yourself through angel, and if you can get it off the ground, you are much better off because you'll own more of it. So that is fundamentally a bit, it's a better thing. But some companies, and today I think the capital requirements are much larger. Yes?
If you do only have like a vague idea of what you want to do, and you hope to find someone with more experience in either the industry or management or the direction of business development, then how would you go about doing that without seeking venture capitalist help?
The question was, if you just have a vague idea and you really do need advice and are looking for help, I mean, I think the center that's exactly what the center is working to do, is creating a network of people who are advisors and who do know about, how you structure financing and how you set up a company. I also think, your peers. I met my co-founder at Cal, and we were friends. And so you know who all the smart people are in your classes, and you can take some cross-functional classes with students of Haas. And so within the peer group of the UC campus, there's a lot of smart people. So it's really about keeping your eyes open. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, go ahead.
You said earlier you didn't like how this corporations are structured as a hierarchy unit. Now that your company has been successful and you're pretty large yourself, did your company just inevitably adopt that corporate structure to it, or were you able to sort of keep it out?
Okay, the question is, I didn't like the corporate structure 23 years ago, but as my company has grown, have we adopted some of those things that I didn't like? It's interesting. It's a really great question. And I get people come to me all the time and say, why is the culture really good at this company? And I kind of am a little mystified, because I don't think we don't have a very corporate culture, and I think we have a lot of the characteristics of the old culture. And it's a very open environment. There's a lot of smart people. There's not a lot of politics. And I think culture, my conclusion is that culture is a little bit like sourdough starter. It does grow on its own. And people who appreciate a good, open culture that's not backstabbing or really hierarchical, they're promoters of that. And then people that don't like that, they tend to leave. So it almost, becomes self-generating. And so I don't think our company has created that, and I don't think you have to. I think that you can be a large company and not have so much of a hierarchical structure. And it's also, I think corporate America is very different today than it was in 1983. I think corporate America has really learned from high tech about, you need to have environments where people want to work, because people have a lot of choice.
Why don't you take any remaining questions?
Okay.
All right.
Any more? Yes.
Well, I was going to ask, when you were first starting up and you had your first product out, how did you even get your initial customers to pay attention to you? How did you contact them?
The question was, when we got our first product out, how did we get our first customers? I can tell you exactly. I got a directory of all the money managers, typed it into the computer, got on the phone, and started cold calling them. And it was the scariest thing I'd ever done, because I had never sold anything. And I remember, making those phone calls, and my heart was just beating. I was so nervous. But I knew that what stood between me and success was that phone. And, it was I was going to conquer that telephone. And so I sold. I called people up, and I'd carry my luggable computer around New York City. And, it was really, it was very, very much basic blocking and tackling. All right, good, it was fun.